Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This video is going to be a continuation of my previous tutorial of how we could build a simple HTTP server in Java without using any frameworks. So if you haven't watched my previous video, I would highly recommend you to watch that video before you watch this. The link should appear somewhere here on the top. Please feel free to click on this and watch that video first before you watch this. Now, in the previous video, we saw how we could actually build a simple HTTP server in Java without using any framework, but our friend Ian was not particularly happy with it. Yeah, it's okay for a simple Hello World HTTP server, but a real HTTP server should actually process a directory path, return a file, handle some basic security. He's right. Our HTTP server is a very basic HTTP server which returns a message. It doesn't really process any directory path or it doesn't return any file. In this video, we're going to see how we could extend our original implementation of HTTP server to actually return a file. First, let's understand some basic concepts. When user requests for a file called index.html, where exactly is this index.html stored? Many of the standard HTTP servers usually store these HTML files under directory var www/html. For this exercise, we will store this HTML file under home directory projects web server documents. We will set this as our base directory and serve files from this base directory. There is an important security problem which cannot be overlooked. Any user with some malicious intent could actually navigate through the directory structure and access sensitive information. In order to address this issue, we have to ensure that we follow these steps. Define a base directory, normalize or resolve the path, and ensure that the path begins with the base directory path. Now, at first, let's do a quick recap. So far, we have created a thread pool and we have a server socket which is listening to port 8080 and accepting any connection. And this server runs continuously and listens to new connections. And we have handle request message where we are handling input request. We read the first line and then we check if it's a get method. If it is a get method, we check the path and we process the output and return the HTTP response. Let's run the server. So the server is running, and in the browser, when we hit messages, we see hello from Coronaut. In order to return various kinds of file, we have to define different content types. A content type could be HTML, text, or JPG, for example. Also, we have to consider various forms of error codes such as HTTP 404 not found or bad request or any other forms of HTTP error codes. So let's define a simple wrapper class in Java called HTTP response, which can hold different content type and different HTTP status and status messages. I'm going to define here a new record type called HTTP response. And this HTTP response can hold string, status, you can call HTTP, content type, the content itself, which is in the form of byte array. Now, as a next step, let's go back and see how we are handling the input at the moment. So let's extract this functionality into a new function. So let's clean this up because we won't be needing this anymore. Actually define a function here. Let's say here from list of string. So this is from HTTP response. So we say here parts size lesser than 2. Remember, we need to have 2 parts at least in order to process this. We will say here return new HTTP response with an error code saying bad request. Bad request has a status code 400. Content type, we can set it to text, HTML, and bytes, it's an empty array, so we just say here bytes. We can even define this as a private static final string. It's here, you're done. Parts, first part, the first part is the request method, and the second part is the path. The first part should be equal to get, no case, request method, then we'll process this, else we will again return a error message saying if it is not get, if a user inputs like post or patch or any other request, we will say here not allowed. So method not allowed generally has a status code of 405. So if it is get, so what we can do is we have to process the path. So we can say here a private method static returns a HTTP response. Say here process path string path. I can return this. Now that we have implemented some basic input and error handling, it's time to implement the processing of input directory path. This is the most important step in this exercise. For this, I'm going to define the base directory path that we are going to use for this exercise, and any user provided input path will be appended to the base directory path. Let's see how we can do this. So for this exercise, I have defined two files. One is a simple index.html, another one is a Java image file. So this is defined under path users, my username, and projects, web server, documents. So let's define this as our base directory. So now let's say here private static final string base directory plus copy this path here and we say, yeah, there we go. We have our base directory. So system.getPropertyUser.home provides us the home directory path. In this case, it's users and my username. And this is just a concatenation of the string here. So this is our base directory. Now let's say, let's create a new file. File is equal to, and pass this base directory and path. So this is a file class that's available in Java. We can now use this file class to actually make some basic checks. So if file dot is directory, so we can actually say something like this. If this is a directory, then file dot get path and append this slash index.html. So the idea is that if the input provided path is just a directory, we cannot really serve any file. So that's why we are going to define a simple default file. In this case, it's index.html and then concatenate with base path. So actually just return the same file. So this is actually our file. So let's make this file. We have our file. So now we talked about one of the security check. Now it's important to normalize the path that user has provided and then make some basic security check. So let's see how we can do this. We say here file dot canonical file. So this is a function which actually does normalization of the path and then returns a file. So please read about it in the Java doc. Also, it makes sure that there is actually a physical file available, and it throws a security exception in case if it cannot be accessed. So this is where when user, for example, has inputted something like double dots, which means that he's trying to traverse the directory, canonical path provides a normalized form of path. Let's say here canonical file, and this throws an exception. So let's handle this. Run this with try catch. So we can make a check here. If this canonical file is can read, and very important is this canonical file dot get path starts with base directory. So we have defined a base directory, and this path of this file that is constructed should start with base directory. So this is where a basic security check is important. We have to make sure that the file path starts with the base directory. Otherwise, user can actually traverse through the directory and also access some sensitive information from the server. Otherwise, we can just say here HTTP response error. Let's say this is a bad request. We say here response code is 400. So in order to read the content of this file, we'll use something called files dot read all bytes. This takes in actually path. So we say here canonical file dot to path. And then we can return HTTP response. Okay. And we say here return HTTP response. Not throw runtime exception, but instead we can say here internal server error. Also, I think the content type, since we are serving any kind of file, including image or text file, the content file is not always text or HTML. So in order to get the content type of any file, so we have something called URL connection, get file name map, get content type for, and we can say here canonical file dot get name. So this returns us a string. So this is a Java core Java available function called get file map. Kind of maintains a hash map of different file types and its content type. So we get content type for any kind of file based on the file extension. If it's a HTML file, we can get this as a HTML content type. If it's a JPG image file, we can get this content type as JPG. So now we can pass this content type here. So this completes mostly the processing of file directory path. So now that we have implemented the input directory path processing and some basic security, let's go ahead and use this. So we can actually now get rid of this piece here. HTTP response.from pass this parts, and then we get this HTTP response as the response. So now comes the final part. Now we have to build the HTTP response, including the header and body. So this structure is going to be very similar to what we did in our first tutorial. Let's go ahead and see how we can make some adjustments to the old function. So in the previous case, we have used write response and output stream. Let's accept HTTP response also like this, and this string will go away, and let's build our HTTP response header. It's going to be very similar. We can say here string HTTP concatenate here. You have to add space, very important. HTTP status code. Then we add a space. Then we say response dot get HTTP status message. And then we say content type, content length. Here we have to make sure that we add 2 new line character. This is a separator for message header and body. So this forms our HTTP header. Remove this and we can say here write HTTP header and dot bytes is the body. So we're writing this in 2 parts. First part is the HTTP header and then the body itself, then flush the output stream. And then we're going to just call this and pass the output stream and response. So this should complete. So now let's run this server. It's running in port 8080. Let's supply here, instead of messages, we say here index.html. It works. And then let's say here Java image. We're able to also serve the message. So we can take a look at the network and we can check here response headers. We can check here status exactly what we have set. Content type is image, content length. And similarly, we can also notice that when we do index, the header content changes accordingly. So what happens when we hit localhost 8080? At the moment, it's not working. I think it's because here we forgot to add a slash. Now let's rerun this. And it works. So if it's a directory and we don't provide any file, it just defaults to index.html. Now let's do some more testing. We discussed how user can actually manipulate the input path, try to traverse through the directory structure. Let's try to check what happens if he tries to do this. Using browser, it's not really possible to traverse through the directory structure all the way to the root directory. So for this, we have to use some tool like curl or postman. So for this case, I'm going to show using postman. So using postman, I can fire a request here, say dot 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 dot, and then I get bad request. So this is because we have added a condition here. If it is can read, and then if it starts with directory, only then process. Otherwise, we return bad request. So in this example, we saw how we could extend our simple hello world HTTP server to actually start serving files. Still want to emphasize the fact that this is still far away from industrial grade HTTP server, but conceptually it is quite similar. Thank you all for watching and see you all in the next video.